Right. So I hope you guys had a good lunch. And basically, today, in this talk, I'm going to talk about OpenDaylight in the trenches. What this talk is about is our past experience, especially with our customers, our engagements, and the different things we did over the Lithium timeframe with Lithium preview components. And so I want to share the experience on deploying OpenDaylight in a variety of use cases, and also the feedback from the users that we gathered. So that's really the purpose of the talk. Sadly, we couldn't, for most of the use cases, we couldn't get to actually publish the use cases, but I'll explain the details about like the components we use, how we actually did things, and why we did things this way. But it is because we're actually helping people do value add on ODL. A lot of them still want to keep what they're doing a little more hush hush. So, all right. So first things first. How many of you attended my talk on navigating OpenDaylight yesterday? All right. So the first thing to understand about OpenDaylight, if you're not familiar with it, my slides are not even showing. So what I was basically saying is that I'll go again a bit on the available projects or the available components of OpenDaylight. So if you've been in my talk yesterday, you might find some little redundancy. But what I want to get to is how can you use these components in a variety of use cases and try to bring a little more imagination to this. Then I will talk about some of the informal feedback I've gotten from the community by working in the trenches with the different engagements and people over this cycle. So, if you're not familiar with OpenDaylight projects, OpenDaylight has 3 offsets, and these 3 offsets are really offset 0, which is more or less the core components of OpenDaylight. Then you have the offset 1 projects, which are usually leveraged by other components or higher level functionalities of the projects. And then finally you have the offset 3 projects, which are most likely leveraging the offset 1, but sometimes they also have a lot of interdependencies between each other. So the OpenDaylight projects that you see here are really the components that you can use in order to build your use cases or solutions. Just so you know what each of them do, I'll just go quickly over them, and then I'll talk about how you can mix them up into solving issues. So ODL parent is the root. I mean, it's just the third-party dependencies. It doesn't do much on its own from a functionality standpoint. It's there to support the build system, allow you to build distributions. And then you have Yang tools. Yang tools is the Yang parser. It parses Yang and creates the code and the code base for processing the information inside your controller. So it takes Yang, turns it into Java, and maps from the Java node sec or the normalized node of the MDSAL down to the actual communication. So if you look at controller, controller right now is basically a larger project which includes MDSAL, some of the underlying carafe work and other things like that. But it is being broken down into 3 pieces. So in the next release, you'll have the MD-SAL itself, plus netconf, resconf that stands alone as part of that. And then controller, which will be more or less a runtime thing. So I'm hoping to work at making this more like the config subsystem, which is the wiring of things, plus carafe into like a single runtime type of project, which so it's likely going to be 3 projects in the next cycle. So this project is the foundation you need to build anything out of any solution out of OpenDaylight. It is the foundation or the foundational platform that you can use. And so when you think OpenDaylight, a lot of people associate it with an SDN. I mean, it is an SDN controller. It starts from an SDN controller, but it's much more. What OpenDaylight really is, it's a reactive platform. If you're familiar with OpenStack, OpenStack's really a more of a synchronous world where you have this environment or these resources, and you're pushing something down from an orchestration standpoint. So you're expressing a request for orchestration, and it's an integration framework that is a top-down or more of a push-based environment, where OpenDaylight has been designed as a reactive platform. So as a reactive platform, what it allows you to do is react on a change of information from one component to another. And this is the real power of the platform. It can be used in any context. And I'll talk a bit about potential uses and what we've been doing with OpenDaylight that spans across basic OpenFlow or any other use cases that you will find. So networking is definitely the domain where OpenDaylight has been focusing, but it can be leveraged in a variety of other environments, and I'll talk about that in the future. So once you've gotten that core, the core is really that reactive platform I'm talking about, where everything is governed by a model, and every change on that model will trigger something to happen. So that reactive platform is what comes out of the offset 0. You don't have information about the protocols at that point. There's no southbound, or there's no integration with devices. Except for the netconf part, but it's used internally. But out of that, it's really just the basic platform for internal communication. And after that, what you have at the upper layer is, for example, OpenFlow plugin. So that's like a de facto. People are expecting OpenFlow support from an SDN controller. So that's your de facto thing that you have out of that. So if you're doing a use case that needs OpenFlow, you'll need to bring in the OpenFlow features inside your controller. SNBI, so that allows you to bootstrap the infrastructure. So secure network bootstrap infrastructure allows you to have a secure bootstrap of your networking environment or your network switches. SDNI is a way to kind of have inter-controller, so controller to controller. There's a good talk on that happening right now. So the SDNI is a federated controller project. So if you have like 2 controllers that need to talk together and exchange information, SDNI is the component that you will want to bring inside your deployment. SXP is extensions, so it's secure packet extensions. And BGP PSAP is the ability to take some BGP or basically work with BGP devices. And then what's powerful about this one is you can then automate on BGP routes or on BGP events. Because it's part of the model, you can make a change, automate a reaction, and it becomes a very powerful construct to create things on top that would leverage that from an SDN exchange to anything that you can that you want to manage and apply policy on. So you also have the SNMP for SDN. That basically just gives you some SNMP compatibility with the controller, so MIB compatibility. So if you want to advertise things to more legacy environments, you can do that. Persistence is, of course, an important one. What it does is it allows you to leverage persistent as part of your data store. I don't know the latest status of that project's output, but last time it wasn't too bad. Neutron, everyone knows, OpenStack. So it is the interface that OpenStack uses today to go down to the controller. Lisp overlay. So if you're not familiar with Cisco Lisp or Lisp, sorry, as a standard, it is a standard that allows you to do overlays at the IP level. Very interesting. And then you have the VPN project, which allows you to get VPN as a service and VPN requests. TSDR, which is time series database. So this actually is the ability to have time series. We actually use that to do a variety of metrics. I'll talk about that a little later. Topology processing is the ability to do the topology management and calculation on the topology of your infrastructure. The PCMM is a packet cable, so it's actually the ability to control DOCSIS-based devices through the CMTS. So it provides you with an interface to control cable environments. You have TTP, which is the table type pattern, so it allows you to give different types to the table. And as we move up the chain, OVSDB, of course, allows you to manage virtual switch or OVS database for the OVS or specific OVS instances. Deluxe is the user interface. And getting there, LACP is link aggregation, so allows you to interact with ether-bonded environments with OpenFlow. And IoTDM is the Internet of Things management. So it is a very interesting project by John. And then you have, of course, VTN, which is Virtual Tenant Networks. I'll talk a little more about that in a bit, but a nice multi-tenant implementation for OpenFlow networks. And then you have NIC, which is the Network Intent Composition or compiler, which allows you to recursively create intents or through a grammar and vocabulary. I have another talk about that later on today. And so group-based policy allows you to apply policy. And finally, service function chaining allows you to specify a service chain that you want to have between your different VMs or different connection endpoints. So that is a very, very high-level view of all the components that you have in your toolbox. And that's really where I wanted to get to with this is OpenDaylight today is really a toolbox and a platform that you can use to build a controller to solve business cases, right? So it's not necessarily the off-the-shelf thing where you'll go in, download your controller and expect everything to work out of the box by just doing feature install all, right? So in fact, that's the worst thing you could do. So because one of the thing, and I've been mentioning that many times over the past days, is OpenDaylight is still a bit siloed. In other words, each project in OpenDaylight has its own view of the world. And in this view, the little problem is that they don't crosstalk. So if you enable one of the features, chances are another one might not work. So there's no guarantee that when you're enabling two things that hasn't been tested or working together, that it is going to work properly from a functional perspective. The world will not crash, the things will not necessarily be bad, but they might step on each other's toes, and there's no like internal conflict resolution. So that leads to the need to have a variety of different deployments or different use cases for things. What we've had, from from a use case perspective, in the past cycle, and you'll see when I go to the stats and the feedback, we got about 27 different deployments. I know it's not huge, but from a project perspective, it's a good start. So 27 deployments was from the period of December to February in some of the Lithium preview thing. And these deployments were not off the shelf, or they were not similar use cases. Out of the 27 deployments, I would say that the majority of them were different from each other. So it was not the pick up and go, I want to run it under OpenStack use case. I know a lot of people want to do that, but everyone that came within that period wanted to use OpenDaylight for a very, very different need or a very specific purpose. So this led to, what we're trying to do is categorize some of the use cases in these different categories. Network virtualization is one of them. Provisioning and agility is another one. So what I mean by network virtualization is like the basic cloud and environment where you want to have multi-tenancy. So network virtualization / multi-tenancy, however that gets realized, is one of them. And then you have provisioning and agility, which is another driver for telcos or for even operational perspective, where you have the ability to react on things and create your own reaction chain, right? So that's what I mean by agility. You don't have to wait on things. The system can react. You can actually, with OpenDaylight as the base platform, it will become easier and easier to add more intelligence to the system and add all the smarts around it, because it's model driven and because it has all the hooks to make this happen efficiently. Then you have policy and security. That's more like the campus-style scenarios where you want to apply a set of policies to the edges and make sure that this type of traffic is controlled. And finally, network monitoring is another one. Or I would not say network monitoring as much as network insight. So people want to know exactly what is happening from a visibility standpoint, especially with these tools. As you automate things, as you bring stuff like group-based policy, intent, within your networking environment, you need to know exactly what's going on from a transparency perspective. It cannot just be, it's this big black box and there's absolutely no way to view in it, right? So it has to be visible enough to get you the metrics. So I'll talk a bit about a couple of use cases. I've identified 5 that were the most recurrent ones, and then I'll talk about the ones that were a little more esoteric at the end. And OpenStack NetVirt with OVSDB is kind of the de facto use case. I mean, a lot of people have been deploying, asking for that, especially in the enterprise IT or the enterprise stack, where they want to have an OpenStack cloud, but they need a little more than just basic Neutron. So if you have a Neutron-based environment, you might wonder, why should I make a switch from OpenVSwitch plugin or like the actual direct OVS plugin to an OpenDaylight installation? Well, the benefits you get out of that is you get more visibility into what's happening for real within the network. In this release, there were even there was even a graphical user interface that allows you to see the tunnels, the actual overlays, the underlays. So it gives you a tool to debug things when your OpenStack install doesn't go well, or when you have changes that to make, or things that you want to manage from a back-end operations perspective if you're the network sysadmin of the data center. So that's one thing. And this stack is a simplified stack. And there's 3 ways to integrate with cloud or with OpenStack today. And that's like the first one. And what this one does is it's a siloed stack. So it cannot work with another application. When you set up ODL like that, it is the only thing that it will do is connect VM to VM in isolated networks. It can give you network flavors. For example, it does the load balancer stuff, load balancer as a service is being fixed but backported to Lithium. Also, it does basic security groups, and what you would expect from a basic neutron functionality in your environment is really what this stack aims at giving you, without the flexibility or without the complexity and the flexibility of other options. So if you want to just keep it this, get something simple going that implements something directly, this would be a good way to go. You also have the VTN components that uses the orchestrator, or the VTN orchestrator, which is another way to do network virtualization. In this case, the difference is with VTN, you will use it when you have a core OpenFlow network, whereas in the past, if you enable the OVSDB netvert, what it's doing, yes?
VTN is an NEC architecture.
Absolutely.
You don't have to have an NEC switch underneath. You may just do it over just any kind of white box or some other physical hardware.
Okay. Well, the difference here is really it needs to be OpenFlow. Oh, yes. So the question is, VTN is an NEC architecture. Do I need to have a VTN, an NEC switch in order to actually leverage VTN in my infrastructure? Did I repeat it well? Or can I use a white box or any other hardware switch? So the answer here is the difference is in OpenFlow versus non-OpenFlow. VTN does its isolation for the virtual networks through OpenFlow. So it needs an OpenFlow switch at the core of your network because it does traffic isolation or the multi-tenancy inside the network, which has its own advantage because you're actually passing the traffic through flow programming across your underlay network. Whereas OVSDB does it at the edge through tunneling, okay? So the 2 methods are good based on the use case and the environment you have. It's not like there's, and that's why when people are all discussing which one should win, or like what's the default way you should set up an OpenStack cloud with OpenDaylight, it is a difficult answer because it is about what are you trying to achieve? What's your environment, and what are the things that you are trying to do within that environment? So OVSDB netvert is the de facto thing because you don't change your network. The network, the typical in a data center environment or enterprise IT, the sysadmin or the network admin, which is not technically the same guy as your cloud admin or your IT admin. So different departments, they don't have to talk together. The guy it gives you a couple of VLANs, and everything else is magic happening on top of overlays between the hosts, right? So you manage the network normally, and you can have a legacy or like a traditional network. and everything is done at the edge through vSwitches that are sitting on the host. And so that's why this one is easier to deploy from a de facto perspective, looks closer to VMware NSX type of solution where it's all about overlays. And in the case of VTN, it's all about underlays. So it's same behavior, multi-tenancy, but one is using overlays, but this one is using underlays. And in the underlay environment, what you have is you have flows that are being programmed across your network. And this one's useful if you, let's say you're a university campus and you've deployed OpenFlow switches across your campus to be really bleeding edge and go in with OpenFlow. VTN would be a good solution because you actually can control a network-wide policy or a network-wide flow through something like VTN. It is made to render directly. And it mainly uses OpenFlow plugin. In fact, I'm not sure. I don't think it uses OVSDB. It's a mistake on my slide. Then the third method, which is another very important / interesting one, and these are all deployments that we've done, I mean, and that has been used in use cases. And this one is a very nice use case. I think you might have seen some of the demos or some of that work. But what you have is you have the group-based policy guys that integrated with SFC or service function chaining. And what this does is it allows you to apply both policy and also service chain constraints in your policy. So you can say, and I'll start with group-based policy. Group-based policy is about managing endpoint groups. So I have this group of endpoints, this group of machines, and this other group of machines. And what I want to do is apply policies or things that these groups can do. So the contract between them, right? So if I have these two groups of machines, maybe that group can speak port 80 or expose port 80, and another one can consume port 80. And by doing that, you're expressing the policies for these groups. So it becomes a very, very important and useful construct in your data center infrastructure. So I really recommend using this plugin when you have like a data center environment and you want to go from a policy management point of view and change the way you operate things without entering the flows one by one or the network rules. So it is a great value add for your network. But there's also the SFC component, which gives you service chains. So it allows you to say, in order to go from A to B, I will have to traverse these different nodes of my service chain. And what this enables is this can be leveraged in other projects like OpenNFV and so on, where when you have VNFs between the different the different elements of your chain, allows you to create your service pipeline if you're a service provider. So this the SFC is really more of a telco requirement. Group-based policy came from data center requirements, but traversed a bit towards meeting some of the telco needs. So if you are building a telco cloud, this is what I would use compared to the pure IT or the pure campus one.
You're showing all the time, you're showing in almost all of the cases till now, you've shown the neutron.
Mm-hmm.
Can't, virtual in a data center, don't you see just OpenFlow switches and GBP and SFC deployed there without any heavy neutron? Just pure network virtualization?
Yeah. Okay.
What I'm asking is neutron is a must here, that's what I'm saying, is a cloud.
Okay, VTN, for VTN, no. Yes? Okay, sorry. Thank you. The question is, do I have to use Neutron in order to achieve network virtualization? Like if I want to simply have an infrastructure or an environment with network virtualization and I don't necessarily want to have it under OpenStack, do I need to have Neutron? Was that the question? Yeah. So the answer is it is getting more and more isolated. This cycle on this one for OVSDB, it is something we've worked on, and we're trying to make sure that it is decoupled, and you could just run like virtual tenants or multiple virtual networks across without OpenStack at all, and then simply map OpenStack afterwards. So this is being done there. VTN is also makes it available. So under VTN, you don't need to have Neutron. You can create virtual tenant networks. And for group-based policy, well, group-based policy is not really trying to solve the same issue. Like, you get virtual networks because you're creating context of endpoint groups. Okay, so it's kind of, you get it for free, but you might not get it the way you want it. So it creates L2 context and L3, layer 2 context and layer 3 context for your endpoint groups, and then applies policies on how these endpoint groups should communicate. So you do get the network virtualization / isolation behavior, but the mechanics are a little bit different on this. And one last thing that, I mean, you take, that's one that Neela talked about in his keynote. It's the green cloud work. So what it does is it takes OVSDB NetVert, the first solution, but adds metrics through TSDR. So what we do is we're doing a bunch of metric collection, and in fact, we had it all outside of OpenDaylight, and we are slowly migrating to using TSDR. So I wouldn't say that it is fully using TSDR today, because it's just something that shipped in Lithium. But the goal is to move all the data collection within the cloud environment to TSDR. So it takes 8 measurement points on each blade and so on, in order to really collect the complete, complete energy consumption, and then calculate carbon footprints out of that. And then another one which you'll find, it is very, very simplistic, but I do see people that are asking for that, which is just a basic L2 switching fabric. So they just want things to work when they plug it in. In other words, no advanced networking management or nothing. They want it to function like a normal switch. And we're, of course, talking about smaller entities here, but they want something where it feels like a normal managed switch, and that's all. So they want to have the ability to create VLANs in different environments, and not bother with anything else within their switching fabric. Finally, another last one that we've done is container and overlays. So I've talked about overlays and tunneling, but when you're working with containers, you don't have necessarily the same level of access to the underlying the edges. I mean, from an open vSwitch bridge to the containers, it is tricky in some cases. That's why groups like Socket Plane and if you're familiar with that, try to work on that. But Lisp is a good way to actually get the encapsulation down to the containers at the scale of the number of containers that you have in an IPv6 environment. So if you have a massive environment, you would go like, and Lisp is very similar from a method to like what Google uses internally, but Google like does IP on IP encapsulation with tricks and non-standard thing, but that it's the same concept in how you manage a large container farm in order to address the different things. So that was some of the use cases we've done over the past. As you can see, a lot of them are OpenStack related, but many were also around the data utilities, or building sliceable or multi-tenant networks with or without OpenStack. And so out of that, what we did is we tried to gather informal feedback from the users. So from these use cases that you saw, we tried to understand how people feel about OpenDaylight. So the period was a little early, so Lithium was not out. It was really from master, so it's between and master. I'm talking development here, but it is the code base that was there from December to February earlier this year. A lot of the code base that you find in Lithium now and the good quality stuff came in a little after, but Ilium was not what we wanted to use in these engagements for a variety of reasons. Of course, don't take this as an official survey. It's totally informal feedback that we got from each of the use cases we've deployed. But I still think it's valuable information to see. And you guys, I will love to get your feedback after I've gone through this, so I get your point of view, especially if there's users in the room. So the type of customers that we've had, when I say retail service providers, it's smaller ISPs. So what I have there is more the tier 3 type of ISPs that we've engaged with, a couple of tier 2s, like one tier 2, a couple of tier 3s. Then we had academia and national research and education networks, which is where I come from, so I know them quite a bit. And then enterprise/private cloud is the last one. So you can see that's the distribution of the people. So the first question we asked them was, why did you choose OpenDaylight for your project? So what's the reason behind choosing OpenDaylight? You'll see that, like for academia, it was really about an open source ecosystem. And that was really the deciding factor. The way to read the chart is the colors actually shows the distribution across the answers. The people could only select one answer. And then for service providers, it was also the vendor-backed approach to OpenDaylight. They wanted open source, but they wanted a vendor community behind that. They didn't want to just go and get an academic product or an academic open source thing. And then for the cloud/enterprise, I think it was really spread across. I don't have any concluent outcome out of this one because the answers were spread out. Then it was, what type of devices are you seeking to control OpenDaylight? So OpenFlow devices only, an hybrid brownfield environment, or when I say vendor devices only, it's more like EMS style, like I want to replace my EMS and or my element management system and with something that's open, but I keep my hardware the same. So if you look, well, service providers were really brownfield. Like it was, I want to keep my stuff that I have right now and slowly evolve towards an SDN strategy without forklifting everything I've invested in because I need to get my return on investment for that stuff. Academia was completely opposite. I got this huge grant and I'm going to spend it on the next generation gear. And then the cloud was really more of a clean slate deployment as well, because usually it is self-contained within the cloud environment that they are building. So most of them were pushing towards more of an open flow fabric. So that's how these results came in. Then question number 3, what are you aiming to achieve with OpenDaylight? So what are the long-term achievements in using OpenDaylight? And well, service providers, for some reason they wanted to increase revenues. I mean, I guess everyone wants to increase revenues, but I don't think, I mean, a lot of people say it's to reduce expenditures or But I think there's a bit of, I want to provide new services, new like bandwidth on demand, or like things that are different that will increase my revenue stream through newer things. That's some of the use cases we've done. But in all honesty, I don't know how that's going to impact the bottom line or the P&L, but that's just my editorial on this one. And then for cloud enterprise, it's to reduce CapEx, OpEx. So for cloud, it's how can I lower the cost so that my managed services from a cloud perspective are cheaper. And also because of the scale, I have no choice but to automate the process. I cannot just have someone do everything by hand. And for academia, it was really research and innovation type of goals. So what's the use case you need from OpenDaylight? Again, basic operations, what that means, and of course these were described, but basic operations means have the ability to create new networks, like just what you would expect from a network. I want to connect this to that inside of VLAN style structure so that the packets can go through and so on. So basic network operations and management. Service chaining / NFV. When you see simpler management, or it's more of a different way to manage your network. So it's all about more of agility and policy-based approaches to managing the network, where you don't have to do everything yourself and you get a higher level management interface for your infrastructure and network virtualization on the left. So as you can see in the cloud / enterprise world, it was the network virtualization that was the most requested feature. Academia NREN was a bit of basic operation and multi-tenancy. So for them, it was, I have 10 different researchers. They all want a network. How can I manage that properly? And then basic operations was I need to connect things over. And for service providers, service chaining and FV was a clear winner on this one. Finally, question number 5. Are you using OpenDaylight to create something for yourself or for others? So are they making a product, selling a service, or solving internal issues? Most of the people have been solving internal issues, so they're kind of solving business-related things. Some of them are selling services, and well, I guess it's spread across. What were your initial impressions from OpenDaylight? Don't know where to start. How many of you in the room downloaded or got to OpenDaylight and didn't know where to start? Just for the sake of it. Okay, so it is a generic thing. Also about lack of documentation. Anyone wants to raise their hand on the documentation part? All right. So, yeah, I think we're aware of these issues, and this is what really came out from from that question. Yes?
You know, I always hear about the acknowledged problems with the OpenDaylight documentation, but I realized today in your project credits, you actually document the fact that it's unemphasized because documentation has been offset to project.
It's worse than that, okay? Documentation is an offset 3 project. It gets built after everything else, even, well, it gets built at the release process. So it's kind of a weird place. So help. So what would you like to see urgently improved in OpenDaylight? Documentation again and user interface were the 2 clear winners. How many of you, like, I really like that. How many of you wants documentation to be improved? All right. And how many of you user interface? That's not too bad. A lot of people, not many people use it. Performance and scalability. How many of you wants more of that? Okay. And security. I mean, security is not bad, but we've had a much better, thanks to Dave and Jorm, security process, and now I think this is actually running smoother than anticipated. But it is still a big concern that we always care about, especially with some of the early issues because we didn't know what to do. So from the alternatives to OpenDaylight, what would be your alternative to OpenDaylight? ONOS, Ryu, proprietary solution, or other open source solution is what we asked. And for service providers, it really oscillated between ONOS and proprietary solutions right now. This is what they said, because they didn't really find other open source solution. Or I mean, there's others, but that's for them, it was the main contenders. And then Cloud Enterprise. Cloud actually was going towards like a Python Ryu style OpenFlow, or it was not only Ryu, but it was also like Neutron directly and so on. So Cloud was really Python-based solution, other open source solution spread a bit across. And then Academia was really trying to not go into the proprietary solutions at all, or as much as possible, really vertically between ONOS and other open source if they're available. So just out of the raise of the hands, if OpenDaylight did not exist, which would be, I mean, how many of you would be using ONOS or already are using ONOS? Okay. And how about the proprietary solutions? Would that be your go-to? Proprietary solutions are not that popular as I thought. Other open source solutions, you'd reinvent it? Okay, cool. And Ryu? Oh, good. Thanks. No, it's great. Thank you for participating. It's actually enlightening on how we take things forwards next. Where would you run OpenDaylight today? That is the question. And remember, that was done in December. And actually, we had a couple of people crazy enough to run it in production, with, of course, just a huge safety net. But OpenDaylight was running in production and then in staging environments, of course. But that was academia or NRENs, right? So they can take a little more risk than a traditional service provider. Then the others were actually, like, service providers had them at it quite, like, in their lab at least, and planning to put it in production at that point. Some of them since then have deployed it more fully in production. And then cloud, of course, is pretty much spread across, right? No conclusion. How successful do you believe OpenDaylight would be? So really, I hope it will be a huge success. But when we did the survey, it was back in December, so it was a lot of questioning again. But a lot of people were saying it's too big to fail because of the ecosystem, the community. So we believe in it. We'll fix the technical issues. The people are there. The people are smart. We'll make it happen. That was a bit, I mean, you get everyone that's here and is a testimony to that, like all the bright people that are in the room or at this summit. If we all work together to make this work, it is going to work. We just need to focus in order to make some of the challenges easier for people to adopt. And too much technical debt, well, that's from an academia perspective, I can understand why, because it's hard to pick up and go and teach OpenDaylight. How many of you did Ed's tutorial or tutorials on the first day? Right. So I guess you've learned that it's, once you actually understand how the mechanics work, it gets easier or it gets less difficult. But compared to other platforms or other solutions out there, the learning curve and the number of things you need to know in order to jump in is much higher. So it is something that is a challenge for OpenDaylight. So basically, different people have different needs. People are seeking to run it into their production environment eventually. And users are very unhappy about the documentation and also about some of the fragmentation in the industry. That's the feedback I've been hearing. Everyone has high hope that we can all converge towards OpenDaylight. And even if components are different, at least the ecosystem's the same, the platform's the same. It doesn't mean that you need to run the same stack. Today I've shown you a variety of ways to do like OpenStack or use cases, but remember that you can also have your own. And in other words, there is no best way to make things happen. Yes?
The underlying OpenFlow switches, what types do you see? Mostly native, hybrid? What vendors? Who do you think is more mature?
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, okay, no, I'll tell you.
Hybrid and native are interesting.
I've seen hybrid. I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. What type of switches have you seen on these installation? And that's hybrid, native, or both. So I've done pretty much all of them, from native. I've worked with NoviFlow and Corsa, so pure OpenFlow switches or pure OpenFlow substrates, down to more hybrid switches from Dell or any other more like vendors that are even white boxes. And what I find is that, and of course vendor switches, netconf quite a bit as well. And what I find is that they're all different, but my biggest problem in all this and getting to a customer is that most of the time I come in and they don't have the right infrastructure for the job they're trying to do. In other words, they bought the switch because it's their favorite vendor and they got it from X. And they never thought about what they really wanted to do. They said, I want an SDN switch, without even questioning exactly what they were trying to achieve out of it. And that gives you a big of a problem, because especially in some OpenFlow environments, if you don't have the right hardware support to do some of the OpenFlow things that you're trying to achieve, it can cause you issues at the application level. So that's been a challenge so far, to the point that I'm hoping that in this next iteration of OpenDaylight, we can create something in OpenDaylight that will allow you to benchmark the hardware and get a profile. So get hardware profiles from the underlying switches. Is it supported? Does it work? Even from like from netconf to OpenFlow to any other southbound, have a diagnostic module that gets you a report of how this is supported by the controller. So I'd love to have that, or work on something like that. So it is on my to-do list with my team, because we do pure play ODL, so we deploy ODL in various environments. So it is very important for us. So that's, but any other questions? So what about you guys? How many of you care about network virtualization? Okay. How about monitoring, metering, getting information from the network? Okay. Provisioning and agility, having the network agility. Okay. Reactive management, something happens, I want to change something else and self-heal and stuff like that. Okay. Policy and security. All right, so we have a lot of work to do. I was expecting clear winners. So, okay, I guess that's why we have so many projects in OpenDaylight, and it's going to continue to grow for the next cycles. I was glad you guys, I know some parts of the talk were a little longer. I'm glad to have you as part of the attendees, and I wish you a great summit. Thank you for being here.